All right, Seth, you ready?
Yes, 1, 2, 3, 4. Hey, everybody, welcome to Anthology podcast. Sweet, Seth, Tim Stafford on screen, and this time Mike on figure Tennessee with me. So figure you can work. It's this time Mike pair.
Yeah. So that was our sweet Seth saying hello, welcome to the Voxology podcast. It's me, Seth Erie, Tim Stafford on the screen, and Daddy Mike right here, and our little dog Arlo in the background, just letting you all know he is in the house.
Also
Seth
here.
Erie,
Yeah.
talk to me. What do you got to say today? What do you want to talk about?
Congratulations.
Congratulations. That's right, because we're the Voxology podcast now, huh?
Yeah.
It's a big deal.
Was it Tim Stafford? I love you. Great job for
Tim Stafford, I love you. Great job for Daddy Mike.
And so far, so guess what? Cigarettes.
Guess what? Chicken butt.
And I love you.
I love
you, beard.
I love your beard.
And I love microphone.
I love your
record it.
microphone. And I love that you record it.
And
That's a lot of
thank you,
positive affirmation.
Thank you for the episode of Fox RC Podcast.
Yes, good work, dude. Well done.
Ladies and gentlemen, I give you a
Ladies and gentlemen, I give you
a sound of peace.
drum roll,
What's that?
music. Cue the music, Tim. Well, that, ladies and gentlemen, is about as good as an intro gets. Seth Thomas Charles Erie going crazy on the mic. He practices this. He's so excited for this. At some point, if you hang around him enough, like, you don't need me to translate it. Like, you can pick it up.
Yep.
But it takes just a little bit because he talks so fast, and it's wonderful. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome. We're so glad you're tuning in today. We've got a couple of things going on. Number one, I want to thank Lyle and Sherry and Linda and Amanda. Amanda increased kind of her support, and then Lyle and Sherry and Linda all came on board, as far as I know, for the first time. And so thank you. As always, this is all sponsored by you, and we're grateful to just be able to keep it free and keep it this way. So we're super grateful for all of our Patreon supporters. If you're interested in joining that community, go to patreon.com, type in Voxology Podcast, and it'll take you right there. We also have a Voxology Podcast webpage if you want to check that out as well. So that's one piece of news. The other piece of news is we have a first today, ladies and gentlemen. We have a first. My children are 18, 16, and Seth is 12. And so one of them is heading off to college. One of them is in the middle of high school and not happy about moving from Ohio to Tennessee. And then one of them is Seth. And he's happy wherever there is a Chick-fil-A.
That's right.
So he's easy. But our week this week started with our oldest getting into his first accident.
Oh, no.
And, yep, totally fine. Rear-ended somebody and pretty much trashed the car.
No.
And then my daughter called me. So she had been up in Ohio in order to get her driver's license. We'd done all this pre-driver training and stuff. Driver's ed, and then you have to take tests and get certified and all this crazy stuff in Ohio. So we were going to take the test in Ohio. So she was there. She had one opportunity to take the test before school starts in Tennessee. And she calls me at midnight the night before the test and says, "Dad, I don't have my permit. I don't have my temporary ID. I left it in Nashville. What should I do?" And Tim, I have to admit that there were many thoughts that went through my head at that moment. First of them was just simply disowning and disinheriting. That was kind of reaction number one. Reaction number two was, hey, we'll just learn a lesson. We'll just learn a hard lesson here, kids.
Yeah.
But response number three was the one I went with, and that's the one that says, "Ooh, she will owe me big time." So I left the house at 1 a.m, drove 6.5 hours to Ohio to get her permit so she could take her test. She passed it. Thanks be to the Lord. I slept 3 hours and then drove 6.5 hours back. Now,
Yeah, because imagine the scenario in which you do that and she does not pass.
totally. But this is relevant because on my drive back, we were supposed to have an interview with Dr. A.J. Levine, who is just one of our favorite people that we've had on the show before. And so Tim Stafford, ladies and gentlemen, Tim Stafford, in this case, he was Han Solo, did the interview by himself and just crushed it. It left me...
I think this is more like if Chewbacca did the interview.
Well, certainly facial hair wise, that is true. And like head of hair wise, for sure, true. But you're going to get to hear an interview today from AJ, and it's Tim. And some of you will think, why does Mike need to be on the podcast at all? And that's okay. I'm secure in my calling. But that is a very natural thing to think when you hear this, although AJ does correct you one time for the use of the masculine pronoun man when people would have sufficed.
As she should have.
I just expected, Tim, that you would have known that.
I should have.
So that was the only piece of disappointment in the whole thing.
Yeah.
But we're in the middle of this little mini-series talking about people and asking them similar questions about their take on the Bible. And Tim I'm surprised. Tim does a great job, especially with the Old Testament is where I was going. Obviously, that's a specialty for AJ. And so, as always, she has great things to say. Anything else you want to say before we launch into it, Mr. Stafford?
Nope.
It was glorious, ladies and gentlemen. So here it is, Tim Stafford and Dr. AJ. Giddy up.
Giddy up. All right, I am sitting here with Dr. Amy Jill Levine, who we have had on, I think, twice, if not 3 times so far. And you have been you're one of my favorite guests. I know Mike is over the moon for you as well. And we've always had conversations that our listeners have loved and felt kind of compelled by. So as we were talking a little bit off the mic, so to speak, we are in a mini series on the Bible. The Bible has been kind of a ongoing stumbling block or a place of constant confusion for quite a few people. So we thought, hey, let's crack it open, get some really wise individuals to come in and speak into that. So thank you, first of all, for making time to come in here and chat about the Bible.
If I can make the Bible a more interesting and safer text for people, I mean, that's one of the reasons I think I was put on earth. So I'm delighted to do this.
I love that. I think that's so great. And I think that we could use so much more of that in all over the place. So I want to jump in with a basic Bible 101 question for you as a professor. What is, what evangelicals come to call the Old Testament, and how did it come together?
Yeah. I actually think the term Old Testament is a perfectly good term for Christians to use, by the way. Okay. I'm old. Old is fabulous. Old is terrific. Old is the bedrock. Old is wisdom. You can't have new without having old. So as long as we remember that old is like, your grandparents that you love and you could not do without. I think it's because if we're going to use New Testament, which we're probably going to do, we might as well just use Old Testament. So how did it come together? It came together over centuries. So it's not a single voice thing. It's an anthology. It frequently is in dialogue with itself. I mean, you can have one text that says talking about beating your swords into plowshares, another one saying, you ought to take your plowshares and make some armaments with it. It allows you to wrestle with God on multiple levels. Think about things like lament psalms. My God, why have you forsaken me? Psalm 22, which Jesus cites. It gives you laws, and then the laws change over time. So if you look at how the law code changes from some of the earlier material in Leviticus to some of the later material in Deuteronomy, it basically eliminates slavery, Israelites holding other Israelites in an enslaved position. So you can see it talking with itself. And the point of doing all this is so that when you get to the end of the text, at least in the Jewish Bible, for the Jewish canonical order, where the text ends with 2 Chronicles, it's the edict of King Cyrus telling the Jews in Babylon who've gone into exile, go home. It's basically repatriation. And what does that mean? It means you go back to the beginning and you start it all again. Or in Jewish tradition, where we read the entire Pentateuch from Genesis through Deuteronomy in an Orthodox synagogue in one full year, in many conservative and Reformed synagogues, it's on a triennial cycle. You get to the end of Deuteronomy, and what do? You rewind, and you think about what you've read, and you think about what you've experienced over the year, and then you read the text again.
Yeah.
So it's a text that comes together with a community saying these are multiple conflicting, sometimes oppositional views, but they're all part of our history, and we need to preserve it all, both majority and minority readings. And we continue to go back to say, how do we as a community continue to live into this text and then out of that text?
Yeah. So that has been a common theme that each of the guests so far on the Bible has articulated, and that is patience and taking time and rereading and really sitting in things. And that seems to be kind of a common, I think we tend to have or at least, in my circles, we grew up where you just pick up the Bible, open it, and then whatever verse you see is God's way of speaking directly to you in that moment. No context.
Oh, that's like playing Magic 8-Ball.
Exactly. It's exactly that. You shake it a little bit, you open it up and see what kind of pops to the surface.
Right. And if you land in the book of Job, heaven help you. I mean, it's probably not a good way of reading the text.
No. Yeah. So when you look at the contextual, so how do I word that? Well, let's move on. Let's move on. So one of the questions that people that kind of came in over and over again was an idea of inerrancy. And so that kind of breaks into different pieces. And one of them is what do I take literally and what do I take figuratively? Some things are obvious, other things are not so obvious. Maybe as the first piece of that inerrancy conversation as a gateway to walk in is what do we take literally? What do we take figuratively? Because a lot of people, I think that if you're teaching a 101 class to people who have never approached the Bible before, how do they approach it? How do they approach the text? How would you advise someone who just walked in blank-faced, open-hearted with the book and just said, what do I do with this?
So like a Martian shows up? I mean,
sure.
Somebody
let's strip it all the way down. Yeah.
Yeah. All texts require interpretation. I mean, basically what texts are dots and dashes and splotches on a page. So first we have to figure out that they're letters, and then the letters create words, and words create sentences. But then we have to figure out what it means. And there's often slippage between what a text says and what it means. I mean, you might experience that in your own life. So my partner will sometimes say something to me, and then I'll give a response and get this very quizzical look. And then we have this gap in interpretation where I'll say, but I said, I meant this. And the response is, but that's not what you said.
Yeah,
right.
Totally.
And now we're reading a text that was written a couple of thousand years ago. So to try to get that, what does it actually mean, is already a problem.
Right.
You also have the problem of translation. So that if you say the text is inspired or the text is inerrant, then we have to worry about which text. What if you're a French speaker? The King James is not going to help you very much. Do you read with Luther's Bible? Well, what if you're Roman Catholic? Do you want a Protestant translation? We're continuing to retranslate Bibles. That's a huge market, by the way. Any people, please go to your bookstores. But if you go to bookstores, there's tons of different Bibles with tons of different translations. Now they're marketed with different colors. Like, you have the domestic woman at home pink thing, and you have the soldier Bible, which is in camouflage, and you got the teen Bible, which looks like it's got Coke spilled over it. The drink, not the other type. So biblical scholars, one of the things that we do is we try to figure out what the earlier text would have been, But since so much of this stuff was conveyed orally, there may not have been an original text anyway. A bunch of people wrote down what they heard.
Right.
And for anybody who's ever been in the classroom, and you would know this because you teach, right? You tell your class something, but they mishear you or they misinterpret it. And then they write down what they think you said, but it's not what you said.
Right.
Oh, so how do we talk about inerrancy when we don't have any original texts? And when some of my students do say things like, well, the King James is inerrant, like that's the one God wants us to read because it says the authorized version on the cover.
Right.
So, well, the person who authorized it was the King of England, not God. So then we've got even more problems. And hence we have the new King James version, just in case the old one wasn't good enough. So we're always struggling with what it meant. And at best, you have to make good guesses. And there are things you can do to keep yourself from going off the deep end. Look at what your community says, because sometimes if you ask several other people how they understand a text, you can have open readings. Yeah. If you recognize from a Christian perspective that the Holy Spirit is still speaking, then the text cannot only mean what it meant in its original context. It has to mean something to the believer today. So what do you do with text, and how do you determine if something is meant for just then at that time or is meant for all people? When Paul says in 1 Corinthians that women aren't supposed to teach or have authority and they're to keep their mouths shut, well, first of all, we're reading somebody else's mail. It says, to the people in Corinth. It doesn't say to the people in the United States, because the United States hadn't been invented yet. And then how do you know whether he's just talking about those people in Corinth? Because we know elsewhere he has women apostles and women deacons. And he even says in that same letter to the Corinthians, when women prophesy, there's a dress code. But he's expecting women to prophesy, and prophesying is a form of teaching.
Right.
So we're always struggling with, what do you mean by it's inerrant? What galls me is that usually when I hear people say the Bible is inerrant, they're usually, the next line is therefore preventing groups of people from doing what they feel called to do. It's inerrant, so therefore women can't teach. Right. It's inerrant, so therefore I'm going to read particular text in a way to suggest that anything other than cisgendered heterosexual practice is wrong. And it's all highly selective. Why don't they say it's inerrant and therefore sell all you have and give to the poor?
Right. Yes.
So it's kind of selective.
Yeah. Yes. With the inerrant, like with the man, the how would you word it? Like a divine relationship between God and man, right? Like that. So
I would say God and people rather than just God and man. But
perfect. Yes.
Do continue.
Yes. Thank you. God and people. So with like I teach English, and so I'm just constantly mesmerized. And you just said it in your own way, like that. What language is. I'm so fascinated by language. I think it's just so interesting. And the fact that you can take a select group of words and you rearrange them, they're all still just those words, but the way that we put them together, whether in writing or in speech, can dramatically change someone's life or day or inspire or tear down or whatever, but they're still just those words. But the way that we construct them is a really important. It's just beautiful. Poetry.
I'll give you two examples of where this works in the Bible. Just so I was an English major, so I very much appreciate what you do.
Love it.
I actually worked on restoration pornography, but that's another subject. So in the beginning in the Bible, right at the beginning of Genesis, where you have this expression, this Ruach Elohim, and Ruach Elohim probably in its original context just meant a mighty wind. We would use the term god awful as a god awful thing, guys. And that's what Elohim means there is adjectival, and Ruach can mean winds. This is like one major wind.
Right.
But because Ruach also means spirit, the same word, and it works in Greek too, pneuma, wind, breath, or spirit. And because Elohim is also the name for God, you can say it's the spirit of God, or you can say it's a mighty wind. And it's both.
Right.
So one of the glories of the biblical text, and particularly the Hebrew text, is that it puns, and it gives you a word that can mean multiple things. As if to say, if you read it this way, you get this message, and if you read it that way, you get that message. And the message is so open and so robust that it's not limited to a single pronouncement. And you can get the same thing in the New Testament. I just finished up a book on witnesses at the cross. And when you look at the centurion in the Gospel of Luke, The centurion in Matthew, Mark, and Luke makes a pronouncement. Matthew and Mark, they say, surely this man was a son of God. And then you can wonder, in Mark, is he being facetious? Like this guy, this dead guy?
Right.
Matthew, you got an earthquake. So got it. Okay, earthquake proves it. In Luke, the Greek term the centurion uses is dikaios, which generally means righteous. But most English translations read innocent. And righteousness and innocence, to me, have very different ideas. But then you start thinking about what's the connection between them.
Right.
That opens up multiple possibilities for how to understand Jesus and how to understand ourselves as well, since we also want to be righteous and innocent.
Yeah. So you personally, maybe you as just AJ, and then you as a professor, and how do you, so when you think about man being involved, like I'll think about, what was the movie? Mel Brooks, it's The History of the World.
Part 1.
When Moses walks out and he's like, God gave me these 15, then he drops one, he's like, 10 commandments. Yes. And you can kind of see, it's obviously joking or whatever, but the idea that man's involvement people's involvement with what it is that God is trying to say to humans. And, that's a funny version that perhaps God had more to say, and it got, Moses dropped 5 of the 15 commandments, and then we just were left with these 10 big things. Like, how do you, where do you sit in the tension between like the divine and the human? I don't
find it to be a tension.
Okay.
And I don't think we should as well. So first of all, on the commandments, traditionally there were 613 of them.
Right.
So you might have a Big Ten, right?
Yeah.
Sort of like you have the Big Ten. The Big Ten is more than Big Ten now, I believe, in football. But so you have the Big Ten, but then love of God and love of neighbor are not part of the 10 Commandments. Mm-hmm. So. You look at those, and then when Jesus redoes the 10 Commandments, he's talking to the guy, we call him the rich young ruler, because in one text he's rich, and in another text he's young, and in another text he's a ruler, whatever. And he throws in do not defraud, which technically is not one of the 10 Commandments. So you can replace them. Right? Maybe idolatry is not my problem right now, but I got a real problem with not being able to love my neighbor. Try to change them. It's all right. They're all there.
Yeah.
So what was your other question?
I don't know. I think part of the inerrancy conversation has to do.
Oh, the wrestling. Wrestling. Okay. So I don't think it's wrestling. I think it's more a form of communication. So that you can wrestle with certain texts when you have to figure out, are these time bound or are they eternal? Is the text being metaphoric or hyperbolic, or are we to take it literally? Like, if your eye offends you, pluck it out. I'm taking that as hyperbolic rather than literal, because otherwise we'd be wearing a lot of more eye patches along with the face masks.
Yeah.
But I take it as, from a theological perspective, it's God in communication with us. Yeah. And anytime we have a conversation with somebody we love, and the love is mutual, and that's supposed to be what the relationship is between God and humanity. Sometimes you argue with the person you love. So you might argue with your parents, you might argue with your kids, you might argue with your lover or your spouse or your sibling. And sometimes you win the argument, and sometimes you don't win. It's okay, you win, but I'm not happy about it. And sometimes you come back the next day with another argument. But the point is, you keep that relationship going. The worst thing you can do in a biblical perspective is say to the biblical God, in effect, the hell with you, and walk away.
Right.
As long as you're still fighting, you're still kind of in relationship.
Right.
And again, that's where the lament psalms come. That's where the arguments come in. I mean, Abraham argues with God. Yeah. Starts out pretty quickly. What if there are 10 righteous people in Sodom? Come on, you're supposed to be the God of justice.
Right.
Moses argues with God. Moses argues with pretty much everybody. Job's only silent for 2 chapters. Then he opens his mouth and he doesn't shut up for the next 30 chapters or so. Jesus, in effect, argues with God in Gethsemane. If it be your will, let this cup pass from me. I don't want to die. I'm not happy with this. Go change the program. So our argument with God is that's to be expected. And God argues back like, gee, people, get with the program. 10 Commandments, a few others, social justice, get with the program.
Right. I like that.
When it comes to the violent stuff, things like the Canaanite, the anti-Canaanite material in the Hebrew scriptures, the Old Testament, first of all, that's limited. So if you go to Jewish sources, Jewish interpretation of this, they say, it only refers to the 7 nations of Canaan, and that's it. So it basically puts an end to holy war. And the other part is because all this stuff is probably invented, because there's no archaeological evidence for the conquest. They're probably stories told by a minoritized people in exile in Babylon or otherwise suffering under attack from whatever empire is running the block at the time, saying, there was a time when we could do this too. We had that power.
Right.
So, you can wrestle with that stuff as well. And that's what the Jewish tradition says you're supposed to. You're supposed to wrestle with that stuff.
Yeah. Yeah. Like that. All right. I'd like to spend a little bit of time talking about feminism.
Oh, good.
And so I've read a few interviews with you where they say, how would you describe yourself? And I think that you put it, and please correct me if I say this incorrectly, a Yankee Jewish feminist.
That's
right?
correct.
Awesome. And then I know you've written a few commentaries that are kind of like feminism in Luke and in different, is that correct also?
I have edited 13 volumes of the feminist companions to the New Testament and early Christian writings.
Love it.
Yes.
So obviously this is something that comes up often. Women in the Bible. You just brought it up with Paul. I have a really good friend who is a pediatric nurse, and she knits back together babies' hearts after surgery. Like just this insane skill and talent that I can't wrap my head around. And we went rafting and we were talking about, like, she just kind of said on a whim, like, it's insane that we trust women to, as doctors, as lawyers, as even, professors and that kind of stuff. But when it comes to the church, often we just don't think that women have the authority to speak into, and it's just this, it's just what? And
well, I think she's right on target.
Yeah.
Good for her.
Yeah. And talking with one of my friends about, when we're looking at churches and whether or not women are allowed to preach or teach or hold positions of authority or leadership in the church, that's still a conversation. And we were talking, we have daughters, and our daughters are an age now where if they are in an environment in which they are being told that they are less than or cannot hold authority or whatever, they're like, I don't want my daughter to be in that place. I don't want her to grow up in that environment or culture. I don't want her to be told, or I don't have that imprinted upon her. So this is less of a question and more of like I just want to kind of open it up to you to talk a little bit about feminist biblical interpretation, how you found what you found through all of your editing and your studies, etc.
Yeah. What your daughters will probably get now is something that goes under the general term of complementarianism,
right?
Where men are gendered in a certain way, gender being a social construct, and women are gendered in another. So men wear the pants in the family, and women wear skirts, right? Because the Old Testament says you can't cross dress, and then you have to figure out, well, what if you're Scottish and you wear kilts, and how do you know? So the Bible is going to give you multiple messages on women. The major problems here are in the New Testament in 1 Corinthians 14. Even if you limited 1 Corinthians 14 just to people in Corinth, where it might be a problem of women speaking in tongues and getting a little bit over enthusiastic. When you get to 1 Timothy backdates it to Eve, right? The woman was not deceived. The man was not deceived, but the woman was deceived and therefore became a transgressor. And it goes on to say, how do women gain their salvation? By making babies. Well, okay, that's a bit of a problem. First of all, I don't believe in a literal Adam and Eve. So, already that's out the window. Second of all, that's a reading choice. If you just read Genesis chapter 3, which is where all this mess begins, when Eve sees the fruit, and she actually thinks about it, it's good to be wise and it's good to the eyes. She thinks about it. So she's a philosopher. She thinks about it. She took up the fruit and she ate, and she handed some to her man with her, and he ate. And the lunk is standing right there. He could have said at any time, "Sweetie, talking with the snake is not a good idea. Let's go make some coffee," whatever. So to interpret him as, willingly giving up his immortality for her, which is the standard reading, that's an interpretation. It's not necessarily the one that you need to get from the text. We can do history here to say, why would this text make such a comment? Well, probably because the pastoral epistles, First Timothy, Second Timothy, and Titus, are being written at a time, second generation, even third generation of the Pauline churches, where you're having a lot of independent women. They talk about young widows, get them married off, right?
Right.
They're independent women with their own funds, and they're thinking, I can run this thing and I can say what I want. And the author here, under the name of Paul, is thinking, let's get these women domesticated and let's make sure that we can control them, and we'll get them married and make sure they have babies, and then they'll be busy being, housewives. That standard bourgeois Roman society. Right. But we also know from the very same books, the New Testament, that women are serving in leadership and teaching positions. You can't be a deacon unless you're doing some sort of teaching and have some sort of authority. And Paul recognizes Phoebe as a deacon in Romans 16. In fact, she's probably the one who brought the letter to the Romans to Rome. He recognizes also in Romans 16 a woman named Junia, whom he calls foremost among the apostles. And there's no reason to think that all the male apostles got together and said, Junia, let's vote for her. She's in the system prior to Paul. Yeah. We have women teaching throughout the Old Testament. You have Deborah the judge. You've got Miriam the prophet. If you go to the Old Testament Apocrypha, the Deuterocanonical literature, you get books like Judith. Or Sarah in the book of Tobit, where women are still doing teaching. You have women teaching even in rabbinic literature, which is moving toward that 2nd, 3rd, 4th century misogyny that you begin to find in the church fathers. You have women teaching Jesus, which is what I think the Canaanite woman does, or the Syrophoenician woman does. It depends upon whether you read Matthew 15 or Mark 7. I think Jesus picked up the idea of foot washing from Mary, because Mary washes his feet in John 12 and John 13. We can wash the disciples' feet. Well, that looks like a little bit of a borrow. So we know that women are teaching in the early church. We also know that women are running some of the house churches, because Paul tells us that.
Right.
So they do have positions of authority. So what happens? The more Christianity realizes that Jesus is not going to come back a week from Tuesday, the more they consider that they're going to be around for a long time. They do what pretty much every other new religious movement does, is they become better citizens than the citizens around them. So Rome was interested in making sure that men do men things and women do women things. And these early followers of Jesus said, we're going to do that. And we're going to do it in Trump suits. So our women are really going to be subordinate, just kind of subordinate. And so on. And that's what you do what sociologists would call this routinizing. That's what all groups do.
Yeah.
And by the way, women did continue to teach. And we know that from the church fathers. It's just certain texts made it into the Christian canon and other texts did not.
Right. And what do you attribute that to? When the Bible gets put together, I'm always trying to find there so many listeners are wrestling with that, like, you've mentioned like books that were left out and why they were left out and why some things were chosen and others were not, when certain things do speak into what you're talking about. What do you tell people with that, like the how and why of why some things got included and didn't get included?
It's a combination of factors. So basically when you do history, you say, what was the reason that? Right. Better question is, what were the reasons that?
Gotcha,
usually,
yeah.
Right. So some of the books that made the canonical cut were simply popular in the broader communities. Everybody's reading them anyway. So if you said we can't read those, they're going to say, excuse me. Some of them were chosen by people who have authority, which means people who have money or people who are ruling you.
Right.
And some of them got debated. So if you look at books, even in the New Testament, in some early canonical collections, there's a text called First Clement, which is kind of like a redo of 1st and 2nd Corinthians, only it's longer and much more boring. There's a text called the Epistle of Barnabas, which is woefully anti-Jewish. It's a horrible text, but it made it into some canonical cuts. And other books were debated, like, do we keep in Revelation or not? It's weird, but it's assigned to John, but we don't know which John it is. But it says the end of the world is here, but we can read it differently. They debated the pastoral epistles, 1 to Timothy and Titus. Some of them came in with different names. They debated the versions, so that in the Gospel of John, to go back to this women thing, that wonderful story in John 8 about the woman who gets caught in the act of adultery and whoever's without sin, let him. It doesn't show up in any of the earliest manuscripts. It starts showing up in the 4th century. And the church think, should we put it here? It shows up in some texts in the Gospel of Luke. Is it in or is it out? So we're always debating, and these borders of the canon are fuzzy.
Yeah.
So we're stuck with what people, a couple of hundred years after these texts were written, decided this is going to be the canon and this other stuff is not going to be. And whether we read that other stuff or not substantially depends upon what church you go to.
Yeah.
So if you're Roman Catholic, you're going to read some of the second century materials, the Proto-Evangelium of James, for example. And then you're going to get a whole lot of stuff about the Virgin Mary that Protestants are never going to get.
Yeah.
It's messy.
It is messy.
But that should be something to celebrate rather than something to bewail.
Right. And that's what I was trying to lead towards. I love the messiness of it. And I get it, the impression from both God speaking or Jesus speaking that they were both invested in the messiness also. That there's something about the messiness of humanity and the messiness of how all of this is happening that they seem to be interested in and invested in.
Well, you cannot have free will without messiness.
Right. And it's a beautiful thing, but it has been turned into a gatekeeping thing instead, or like a boundary focused thing, or you know what I mean? So it's
right. Because what we're trying to do is we're trying to fit all these texts into the same box.
Right.
Which is more or less what the discipline of biblical theology does, is let's find some overarching principle that holds this all together.
And it's a small box.
It's a very small box, and people keep inventing different boxes. So, if somebody got it right, we could just stop and go on to do something else, but we don't.
Right.
We keep worrying about the boxes. The Old Testament, I'm using the Christian term here. The Old Testament directly points to Jesus, and it has a purpose. It's all got to do with Jesus, from chapter 1, verse 1, all the way up to the end of Malachi, which is the Christian canon. Yeah. The Old Testament, the Tanakh, the Jewish Bible, it's got no goal. It just talks back to itself. So right. Even canonical order will determine whether we're boxed in or not. I get really worried when people start doing types of biblical theology or even biblical ethics, and they say, and we have to put you in this box. Because boxes are constraining. And boy, the one thing we really know about God is God cannot be constrained by anything.
Yeah. Let me ask you two last questions. One of them kind of in what you were just talking about, and this is a two-part for the first one.
Do I have to write this down? It's been a long.
I think this is pretty straightforward. But in the two parts, why or how is the Old Testament, to use those words, important or instructive to folks who live in like a New Testament ideology? And then how does the New Testament play into your Jewish identity?
Okay, well, those are very different questions. The New Testament is the middle of the story. So if you just start at Matthew, you've missed the whole first half.
Right.
The New Testament consistently quotes the Old Testament, right? So Matthew starts with the genealogy. So it's son of Abraham, son of David, son of God. How can you understand Jesus unless you know the stories of Abraham and David? And then all those other people get mentioned in the genealogy, including the women who get mentioned, like Tamar and Ruth and Rahab and Bathsheba. So you have to know that material. We're also substantially living in an Old Testament ethics sense, because when Jesus gets asked what's the greatest commandment, he cites Deuteronomy 6, which is love of God, and he cites Leviticus 19:18, which is love of neighbor. So he's drawing his whole ethical stance from the Old Testament, except he's doing it as a Jew would do, which means you have to interpret the law in the same way we can have, the Bill of Rights or the Constitution, and we have to interpret what does it mean that you have the right to bear arms? Does it mean you can have an Uzi in your house or a Kalashnikov, or should you?
Yeah.
So to leave out the Old Testament is to strip away Jesus' own roots, is to strip away the word of God. When Timothy says all scripture is inspired, he's talking about the Old Testament because the New Testament hadn't been written yet.
Totally.
So to dismiss the Old Testament, I think, is just dumb.
Yeah.
Does all of it apply to people today? Well, of course not. Not all of it applies to Jews today. A lot of it has to do with how you run the temple, and we haven't had one of those since the year 70 of the Common Era, when the Romans burned it down. But those words still matter, and they still can speak to us today in different forms. How does the New Testament inform my Judaism? It doesn't. If you mean by Judaism, how do I worship as a Jew? then it doesn't make any difference.
Yeah, I meant more like your Jewish identity. Does any part of the New Testament, Jesus, everything you just said about Jesus linking back to the Old Testament, does any part of the New Testament speak into your identity as a Jew?
Yes, in that sense it does, because it informs me of my own history.
Okay.
So I think people ought to know where they came from, and I think they ought to know a majority opinions. And so we've seen in the United States today so much concern over the legacy of the Lost Cause movement. But if you don't know anything about the Civil War, then that whole background makes no sense whatsoever, and then you can't have a conversation with somebody who espouses those views. You have to know something about them.
Yeah.
So Judaism in the first century is marvelously robust. You have the early followers of Jesus, among whom they don't even agree with themselves. Paul and Peter are not the best friends in the world, despite what Acts says, because Luke's just cleaning up the history. You have the people who wrote the Dead Sea Scrolls, and some of those are in conflict. It depends upon the scroll that you read. You have people living in the diaspora, like Philo, the Jewish philosopher in Alexandria in Egypt, who's writing this heavy-duty allegory stuff. You've got Josephus, the Jewish historian, who's living in Rome under Roman protection, writing the histories of the Jews. So for my own Jewish background in the synagogue, I learned in synagogue, in Hebrew school, for example, in Sunday school, I learned up until the Maccabees, which is the Hanukkah story. And those are the 160s before Jesus. And then like magic, suddenly we're over into about the year 200 of the Common Era, which is the beginning of written rabbinic documents like the Mishnah and then the Talmud. So if I want to know about first century Jewish history, the New Testament is actually a splendid source. And if I want to know about Jewish women in the Galilee, the New Testament is the best source that I've got, other than some archaeological stuff from which you can extrapolate. So the New Testament fills in for me Jewish history. And sometimes when I'm reading, particularly the Gospels, and I'm listening to Jesus tell a parable, for example, and he's evoking tropes that you find in Genesis or tropes that you find in Psalms. He gives me a new way of reading my own text, which is what rabbis ought to do. Here's your text, and here's what it might mean for you today. So he's giving me additional Jewish readings, and some of them ring entirely true to me.
Can you give an example of that?
Oh, yeah. In the parable that's usually called the parable of the prodigal son, which most Christians read about. The prodigal is the repentant Christian, and the older brother is this nasty Jew who doesn't like Gentiles, as if working for a pig farmer turns you into a Presbyterian. So what the parable actually does in the context of Luke 15, which is the lost sheep, the lost coin, and the lost son. Parables, Jewish storytelling has something called end stress, where the ending is the important part. And basically this parable says everybody should be counted. This older brother who is home, dad has enough time to call the band and the caterer, but forgets to invite the older brother. So finally he's got to go out and invite him. No wonder he's angry. And there's a midrash, a Jewish story that says that we are like sheep and God is like the shepherd, and God counts us each and every one. And I think that's what's going on in that parable. And that sends me back to all those older brothers like Cain and Esau and Ishmael and the three older sons of Jacob who get written out of the tradition so Judah can have the Davidic line. Say, what are the stories being told about them? And how do we see them as part of the family as well?
Yeah.
So rabbinic sources do that. Jesus just does it really, really well. And he does it earlier than the rabbinic sources. Good for him.
Yeah, I like that. All right, last question. I saw an interview with you, I think I read it. You don't see interviews unless you're watching them.
Unless you're watching, yeah.
So music for me is such a big, it's a thread that helps me make sense of the world in a lot of ways. I love music, and again with the way that words go together, putting marrying the way lyrics are written with harmony and melody and all that kind of it's just what a wonderful way of articulating and telling stories, etc. And I saw an interview with you. Again, I listened to an interview with you. I think maybe it was on an Australian radio show, or I'm not sure.
Oh, where they asked me about to intersperse favorite musical elements?
Yes. So I wanted so you led the interview led with Meatloaf.
I love Meatloaf.
I love that. I feel like every time you come on, we get another little piece of the tapestry, and this was a new piece that I found, and I just thought it was.
Tapestry, I believe, would have been Carole King, but let's not quibble.
Perfect. That's my mom's favorite record of all time. I'm very familiar with it. So Meatloaf. I don't even know how many of our listeners would even be familiar with Meatloaf. But you, the interview led with "Bat Out of Hell." So I wanted, if you could leave us with like a top 5 AJ playlist.
Oh my goodness. My son's a violinist. He plays klezmer music. I like to listen to him. I have a bunch of videos. I just turned those on. I was like, there's my kid.
That's awesome.
So I actually do very much like klezmer music. And that you can find pretty much anywhere.
Yeah.
I adore Gilbert and Sullivan, and I think I threw in something from the Mikado on that list. That was the Australian Broadcasting Company a number of years ago. I very much like smooth jazz. Mm-hmm. That's background when I work. I like Frank Sinatra and Dean Martin and Perry Como because it's danceable.
Yeah.
So I can say to the partner, it's Frank Sinatra doing New York, New York. It's time to dance. I like that stuff. And I very much like classical music. I like opera. I like Mozart. I like Brahms. And I've never been able to develop a taste for Wagner. I wonder why.
And then there's Meatloaf.
Which
I want everybody to go out right now and listen to some.
Oh, and if you want to listen to something else, which I listen to not when I'm working, but when I need to laugh, I listen to old Tom Lehrer recordings.
Oh, interesting.
So if your listeners don't know about Tom Lehrer, songs like "The New Math" and "Pollution" and National Brotherhood Week they're just fabulous. I heard them when I was a child and didn't quite get them. And then heard them again when I was in high school. And that's why my parents were laughing so much. And they have stood the test of time.
Love it. Thank you so much for hanging out and talking and sharing with everybody. Like I said at the beginning, you are always one of our favorite interviews or conversation partners, and I don't know, I always love it and appreciate it. So thank you so much. Very kind.
Thank you, because you take me away from the work that I'm supposed to do to allow me to do the stuff I want to do, which is to talk about this. So thank you very much. Always a pleasure.
So there you have it, ladies and gentlemen. Tim, what was that like for you?
I was nervous.
Yeah. Well,
I'm sure that comes through.
Well, of course. That's, I mean, on the one hand, it's just asking people questions, but it is harder than it kind of first appears.
It's way harder than it seems. And she is just so awesome, and I have a lot of respect for her, and she's wickedly intelligent.
Yeah.
So it was intimidating, at least.
She's dynamo, Spitfire. Those were words that were used. Yeah, did you enjoy it?
No, I was telling her before we went on too, like, she is easily one of my favorite guests that we have had on the podcast.
Yeah. Since
I've been on here. She's so funny and so she's so quick.
Yeah.
So
yeah.
She can disarm you quickly in the best way. So she's a lot of fun, and I always learn a lot when she's on. And it's, you have some guests who are really, really smart, but they can be pretty boring. They're just like academic giants.
Yeah.
Or you can have people that are really funny and quick or whatever, but they don't bring a lot to the conversation. But she pulls both those camps in together. So she's a delightful person to talk with.
Yes. Yeah, she really is. And so I thought, first of all, I did not want to postpone her at all because she's so busy. So Tim, thank you for stepping up. Hannah and I owe you dramatically. And just a reminder, she passed. So it was all worth it in the end. And you had a great conversation with AJ. There were some things that were said that I just want to kind of reiterate that I thought were super interesting and well put, if you don't mind.
Please do.
And I love, I mean, it's just seriously, the first thing you say is like the Old Testament. And she's like, old is great. I'm old. Yeah. Old is good. Old is wisdom. So it's such a great, what I like about her so much is that she embodies the gracious curiosity and hospitality that we want to embody. So here she is, just unmistakably Jewish and unapologetically Jewish, teaching New Testament students and perfectly willing to be in dialogue with people who think she's going to burn in hell and, that she's a false teacher or whatever. And I just think that's a kind of a remarkable sort of person. I want to be like that.
Yeah.
And then what she brings to the conversation is so unique that you just don't hear from regular sort of evangelical folks. The idea that this is the Bible is an anthology. I love that word. I've called it a library, but an anthology I think is another great image to pick up what's happening. And the thing that blew me away, and again, these are just total Bible nerd points, but she was right to comment on the different ordering. So in the Jewish Tanakh has a different ordering than what we call the Old Testament.
Yeah.
And as she commented, it ends with Chronicles, and it ends, and I'd never thought of it this way, but it's so true. It ends with the invitation to go home and do it again. Go reclaim the land. Yes. I thought, wow. Because see, I always frame, and we as evangelicals always frame, we end it in Malachi. And in Malachi, there's literally the last chapter, the last little bit of Malachi is looking forward to the coming of a prophet. And it's a parallel to a verse in Deuteronomy that talks about how there was never been a prophet like Moses. Right. And the end of Malachi kind of hints at that a little bit. And so the end of Malachi is looking forward, but it's anticipating something that God's going to do. Yeah. Whereas in Chronicles, there's more of a deliberate, close parenthesis. Okay, now we're back in the land. What will happen? And I thought, wow, what an incredible perspective, because I think both can be true at the same time, right?
Right.
The Jewish nation inhabits, and the thing I love about AJ when she talks about the Bible, this is not doctrine for her. This is a story she inhabits. This is history she inhabits, and she's totally okay if parts of the story are held in tension with other parts of the story, and parts of the story evolve due to different, like the stuff that was written after exile in some cases is different than the stuff written before exile, because there are different points being made. So 1st and 2nd Kings and 1st and 2nd Chronicles will have different narrations, and even 1st, 2nd Samuel, they'll have different narrations with different emphases. And that's just true. Yeah. That's just part of how the thing was put together. And so I love that way of speaking about the text, and it totally jives with what we were talking about with Gambas. This is world building. And what we're invited is not to believe in the traditional Western sense of intellectual believing, but we're invited to inhabit a reality, a world, a narrative, a story that is still being written and yet has so much in terms of its antecedents that we're able to understand what faithful participation might look like today.
Right.
So I just thought that was a killer way of seeing that, and her commentary. So this tickling me right now as we're trying to have this conversation. I thought. Who says I can't focus?
Me.
Oh yes, me. I know. And so the way she talks about the Bible is different. It's not a systematic theology. It's not some dry and dusty doctrine of inerrancy.
Right.
And I think that's part of the legacy of the Jewishness of Jesus that has been lost when we've made him into a Christian, is that we've taken him out of that grand story, that grand, the narrative of their different emphases and things held in tension. He's now pulling my shirt up and trying to tickle my belly button. And let me tell you, that's a big target, but that's not what we're going to do right now. Correct? Correct? Thank you, Seth Erie. So the way she simply just talks about the Bible is so different from how it was discussed in seminary and how it was discussed in just a lot of academic circles, right? This is not something that's dissected like a frog in high school biology. This is something inhabited.
Yeah.
And I just think that's so good. And that posture enables her to hold together things that seem like their intention.
Yes.
And she doesn't feel this huge need to resolve those things. She can just sit there and stand in the middle of those things because the text is in conversation with itself, as she puts it.
Yeah.
So I absolutely loved it. And she had a line where she was talking about she lives into the text and then lives out of it.
Yeah.
So much of Jewish spirituality is almost exclusively focused on the here and now, whereas so much of my inherited culture was focused on the then and the there. You know, after you die or God comes back, then, or Jesus comes back, then what happens? And so I love that and this is consistent across Jewish folks that I've met who are academics or who are guides in Israel or who are just practitioners, they look at Christians and just shake their heads about why all of the focus on what happens after you die, and why not the focus on what happens while you live.
Yeah.
It makes sense when they put it that way. And the one last thing I loved that she said, I mean, there are more, but I really missed not being a part of this. So I'm just, amening different things. But she talks about how arguing is a relationship. And I loved that line. That the text doesn't demand our meek submission in the ways that we think that it just forces us into passivity. But it demands and requires, I said demires, I think.
Yeah. It's like, man.
Real
seriously.
It demands and requires a kind of meek chutzpah where we're engaged and engaging. And I love the idea of arguing as a relationship. And you look at Habakkuk and you look at some of the prophets, Lamentations, obviously the lament Psalms. There is a back and forth with God that God seems to welcome. And then when Jesus welcomes it too, the people he responds to, and she referenced the Syrophoenician woman when Jesus talks about, the dogs and the bread. Like she has chutzpah in the way she responds to him, or the centurion, or the woman that interrupts the dinner party as a notorious sinner, or the woman with the issue of blood that fights through and contaminates a crowd, right? Mm-hmm. These are the kinds of people Jesus responds to over and over and over again, and that is totally consistent with Yahweh's practice to people in the nation of Israel, that the indifference is just as bad as the idolatry. Yeah. But the engagement and the wrestling and the struggle, like all of that is beautiful. So I just thought, man, all of that's really good. I think the things I would have followed up with her on were things like we don't have the original texts. And that can mean a couple of different things depending. Like there are two texts, one Old Testament, one New Testament, that every English Bible uses to translate from, except the classic King James. And you can open those texts, and at the bottom of them will be hundreds of textual variants. Like, this certain manuscript will have this word translated this way. And it's absolutely nuts, but there literally is just one Hebrew Bible, one Old Testament, and one New Testament that everybody uses as the basis of translation. And because we have so much manuscript evidence, certainly we do not possess the original autographs, the originals that were penned by the apostles. but the reliability of what's been reconstructed from the thousands of manuscript bits and copies. Yes, Seth is now tickling me, and Arlo is barking in the background. This is what happens when we podcast and no one else is home. Seth Erie, go sit down. You told me you would be quiet.
Chicken butt.
Chicken butt. Thank you. Oh, my goodness. I'm just trying to focus. I'm just a man trying to focus, Tim. So I would say, yes, we don't have the original texts, but that doesn't mean we don't know what the original text would have said. Now, that's true in some cases, like in John 8, all of our Bibles will have, hey, this was not found in our earliest and best manuscripts, the women caught in adultery, or the ending of Mark. There'll be that sort of thing. So there are cases where there are pieces that don't fit in. 1 Corinthians 14 is another where it speaks about women being silent. One of the foremost scholars of 1 Corinthians says that's actually an add-on that was originally somewhere else. And all of that is just fine, and all of that shouldn't scare us even remotely. And this is the last thing I'm going to say about this, Tim Staff. I'm going to refer to yet another Tim Mackie, Mackie. He has a video on YouTube called, The Formation of the Bible, maybe? Just type in Tim Mackie Bible, and it was part of something called the Year of Biblical Literacy that a church in San Francisco and a church in Portland did together. And it is an hour, 46-minute lecture on how the different strands of the text come together. And it's actually the best thing I've ever heard at a popular, approachable level that is just first-rate scholarship.
Yeah. I think a lot of people wrestle with all that stuff that you just said about how the Bible comes together and how there are other texts that say a little bit different things, or that man has been involved in pulling things together.
Of course.
That's a pretty big stumbling block.
And remember, it's human.
But I think that's when you were just talking, like when I think about errancy and I think about all the stuff that you just, or even where you started with how AJ was talking about how it ends in Chronicles, or in the Old Testament ends in Malachi, and the different inference that the way that what it propels the reader to are different conclusions, or they're different. They posture you in different places, right? Looking forward or re-engaging, and neither of those being wrong, and both of them serving a really important purpose within, how important it is to, I think I said to her, Gambus and Josh both said the same thing of really, and you say it all the time, spending time in the text, being patient in there and rereading it. And she was kind of saying the same thing too, and that it ends with re-engage with this. And I think that that's something, at least in my limited experience, is something I've experienced my whole life with how we engage the Bible. Is there's very little I almost want to say, it sounds weird, but I think there is a complete lack of respect for the text. Even though we say it is in the name,
text. Yes, that's the irony. So there's a book called "The Bible Made Impossible" by Houston Smith, I believe is his name, and that's his argument. This so-called high view of the Bible actually keeps us from having a real high view of the Bible.
Totally. Because the errancy, if the Bible can be orchestrated in that way. Differently and cause two things that God would be invested in: re-engaging with the text and seeing how, and then looking at what's coming. If God is invested in both those things, that gives the Bible a much more robust existence. Totally. And then the fact that happens though because of people's involvement, but most likely it was men, which we know. Putting that together, well, that's where the errancy, quote unquote, comes in. But the errancy seems to be part of God's plan. So, what I mean?
Yes. Okay, this is where you literally, I'm telling you, stop the podcast, and go listen to Tim Mackey's thing. And he even says, obviously people will disagree, but it is the clearest explanation of what the Bible is and where it came from that I've ever found.
Well, find it and I'll put it in the show notes.
You know what? Why don't you put it in the show notes once I find it?
That's a good idea.
Yeah. But
you're an idea guy.
Well, if it involves pointing to other really intelligent people, yes. I don't know that it's an idea guy as much as it's just like recognizing, genius other places. So I think Tim and AJ would look at, there are a couple of things they look at slightly differently.
Yeah, totally.
And that is a worthy exploration. So I can't recommend that video enough. And listen to it when you've got time to pay attention to it. I know, there's one version that's an hour 46 and one version that's like 2 hours, and I don't know the difference between them.
About 14 minutes.
Yep. Great point. I don't know if that 14 minutes is Tim telling jokes or if it's content. It's just really, really accessible. And that's why I'm stoked on it, is that...
Oh, he's a genius.
Is that people can go and he's not talking about why it's trustworthy. He's just talking about how it was put together, this divine human dance.
God, it's so interesting.
And yes, and that's the part that is God's design, right? Because this whole thing's been a partnership from the beginning. So of course,
see, I got goosebumps with just that is it emboldens God's investment in us, right? Like, you know what I mean? Like, yes. It's just like, it's so, there is so much of a dance. There's so much of a, God is maybe perhaps leading the steps, but there is this like, don't step on God's toes, or like,
right.
Find the rhythm, find the melody. I don't know. It's very interesting. And
to take that one step further, participation and engagement and partnership with God in the text and with the text and for the text and alongside the text, right, is some theologians call it improvisation. My goodness, English, hello. Like there's a scene and there's a setting and there's characters, and then you're invited into it to carry it forward. And all are the intentions, what's come before, the intentions of the author that seem to be revealed throughout the characters. Yeah. And I love that picture. But the last thing it is dry, dusty, and boring. And so when I read like Deuteronomy, I'm not looking for doctrinal passages. I'm imagining what it's like to be Moses.
Yeah.
And to see this and to see Yahweh this way, and to say to the people of Israel over and over again, don't you know what's coming? This could be so good, but it's not going to be. And you just feel the weight over and over again. You sit in the prophets, and there's so much imagery they use that I don't understand. But yet there's this agony just over and over about why God's people, why do you keep chasing after the things that will destroy you? And we sit in that feeling today, right?
Yeah.
Gambas says something that is absolutely true, but really clear when he says it. The commands of God are always provocative. They're always illustrative. They're not open and shut laws. So when it says love your neighbor or go and do likewise, it doesn't say, here's how you go do that. It purposefully, like that's why when I teach and in a church, I don't often do application, like here's your 3 points to take home.
And that's such a big piece of the church teaching.
Right, because the Bible doesn't do that. Or if it does, it's given to the community.
Yeah.
To inhabit together. But it's purposely designed to spur us on into creative goodness. So what's love my neighbor mean? Well, it depends who your neighbor is. And what is love for them, right? There's totally. And so wrestling is built in to the thing. And so, but at the same time, and this is what I want to guard against, and this is where I depart from some of my more progressive friends. I think there is stability here. I think there is a landing place here. I don't think it's just wrestling without any firm footing anywhere. I think there are places that you can step from and wrestle from. And so I do think the text is trustworthy, and I do think the text has a different kind of authority than traditionally what we conceive, right? Because the only authority we know of is coercive. And so, we make the authority of the Bible in terms of heaven, hell, punishment, and reward, because that's all we know. The Bible influences a different kind of authority called wisdom, an example. And that is way more powerful. But I do think the Bible has authority within it that is, and obviously I think it's a unique authority. So on the one hand, the inhabiting of the text so that it just provokes us to churn and wrestle and agonize and argue and cry out and study and be curious and all those things. I love that. But that's not a forever thing either. There are places I think you can land. One of them obviously is the person of Jesus. I think there are good reasons to think that's an accurate portrayal of a real human person named Jesus of Nazareth. And then I step into his world from history, not as the inspired word of God, but just into his world. And that takes me directly into the Hebrew scriptures. And then I'm inhabiting his world, making sense of his world because, or at least beginning to, because I'm now sitting at it from the inside, right? I'm looking at the text that he saw as important and authoritative.
Right.
And I'm inhabiting those, and then I'm seeing him live and move in and out of those, and even argue with those.
Yeah.
And so it's just so that then motivates my engagement in the writings of the apostles. And with all due provisions of, we only have half the conversation most cases, we're very distant from them, but they inhabit a world that we can still kind of anticipate and get into.
Yeah.
And then those epistles make so much more sense.
Yeah.
Because of the work they're doing in first century church communities, So anyway, rambling on, but I hear and I hear her and the way you engage with her, and it's just inspiring because it's such a different mode of operating and approaching the text from this kind of perspective.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah, the whole conversation about authority, and it's just so much more nuanced and interesting than what we were handed.
Totally.
And I love it. I think it's so great. I love that the example that you gave, I think, is a great example. Like, love your neighbor. You as Mike Erie, your neighbor versus me is different. But even just like Moses, like all of it is contextual and circumstantial. But there are elements of it. Like when I teach my English classes, none of them are English students because it's composition classes. And so, they're like, why am I taking an English class? I'm like, well, hopefully what I'm doing is giving you a tool belt to figure out how to think critically and how to analyze and how to understand an argument so that you can relate yourself to it. And a lot of authority in that way is kind of equipping us, for a word that I know you love, to be able to critically think and engage not just the text, but our culture, our church, our community. It's so much bigger than thou shalt not and thou shalt. It's like there are some, we need certain muscles to be able to take up that vocation that we were tasked with. So it's really interesting.
Different muscles, different practices of inhabiting the text. And then patience.
Patience has popped up a lot.
Key. Yeah, it actually turns out that a 2-minute devotional sentence from a writing doesn't quite capture what the scriptures are trying to do.
No.
So let me just say, as Seth is doing more tickling, on behalf of Mike Erie, Nathan and Hannah on the phone, Arlo barking from the bathroom, and Seth breaking all sorts of promises to just sit and be quiet. We just want to say we love having these sorts of opportunities, and the joy has been the friends we've made along the way.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
They tied that up.
And AJ is certainly one of those.
Totally.
So if you're interested, check out the Mackie video. Also, Gombis he's starting to go through Romans, which is, man, that is the most misunderstood book of the New Testament.
Yeah.
And
that'll be fun.
Yes. So check out Faith Improvised if you want to do that. Those are just a couple of things that. Why are you giving Tim a thumbs down?
No, it's at voxology.com.
Yeah. Oh, I didn't say voxology.com. So I was getting a thumbs down. So visit voxology.com, which is still very much in process. Anything you want to add?
That's not even ours. Ours is voxologypodcast.com. Voxology will take you somewhere else altogether.
Oh, I'm glad you said something. All right. Anything else, my friend?
Nope. I hope it was helpful for people.
Yeah, for sure.
It's been helpful for me.
Oh, yeah, this has been great. So Seth, yes, we're saying goodbye.
Fox LZ, thank you up.
Thank you.
Queen, please.
Thank you for recording.
Like to foxology.com.
Voxology.com.
Thank you to listening.
Thank you.
was probably parking in the bathroom when out.
Yeah, Arlo's barking in the bathroom right now.
Thank you, everybody. For listening to us. And see ya next weekend.
See you next weekend.
And see you. Great.
See you.
We're going to school.
Yep.
And so, congratulations. Thank you so
Congratulations.
much.
Thank you so much.
We are Voxology Podcast.
We are the Voxology Podcast.
Boom.
There it is. All right. Until next time, friends.
Thank you for listening to this conversation. Voxology is a 501c3 nonprofit organization that is supported by listeners just like yourself. If you'd like to partner with us, you can do so at patreon.com/Voxology. You can also join the community and hang out and chat with us on the socials. Facebook.com/Voxology Podcast and on Instagram @Voxology. Thank you for walking the long road with us.